I guess we can begin tonight's presentation. With us tonight, we're very fortunate to have one of the foremost economists from the European continent, Dr. Branko Horvat. He has done a number of things. He had left secondary school in the 1940s in a guerrilla war against National Socialism, Nazism. He has a number of heads: Research Associate in Institute of Economics at Zagreb, Head Research Department, Federal Planning Bureau, 1958 to 1962 for Yugoslavia. He's Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister of Yugoslavia, and has been an Economic Advisor to a number of different countries, to Bangladesh, to Peru, to Brazil. And I'm sorry we're a little bit late tonight, but Dr. Horvat had to wash dishes at the commune after dinner tonight, which is a rather appropriate introduction for his topic, which is distribution according to work. So our lecture series, this is the second in the lecture series, Marxist Alternatives to Continuing Crisis, and I should mention now that the third lecture will be sometime in January, around the 15th of January, for everybody to make note. But right now, I feel we're very fortunate to have Dr. Branko Horvat from Yugoslavia. I guess you know all your titles. You don't need this.
You may interpret what I'm going to say in terms of your general heading of this project or seminar as a Marxist alternative to the continuing crisis of contemporary society. It's not necessarily related directly to this country, but if you wish so, it may be related or it may become related. I chose this topic because exactly 100 years ago, German Social Democratic Party was about to have an important congress in Gotha. And Marx wrote a criticism of the program of that congress. And the criticism was so strong, apparently the program was so weak, that the leadership of the party suppressed what Marx wrote. That was an ominous sign of what was going to happen later on when these supposedly workers' parties become governmental or ruling parties in their countries. And Marx didn't live to see his manuscript published. It was left to Engels to publish it in 1890s, and Marx died in 1883. Now, one of the statements that he made in this manuscript, which came to be known as the critique of the Gotha program, was that in socialism, income should be distributed according to work, from each according to his abilities and to each according to his work. And this principle has been so much identified with socialism that it's more or less the definition of socialism. I may also say that Marx didn't invent this principle. He really inherited from Proudhon. And those of you who now attend some of the Marxist classes at this campus may know that Marx and Proudhon quarreled. And that is why epigons of Marx disliked Proudhon. And Proudhon surely had all sorts of weaknesses. But he also made some wise statements, like this one. However, the epigons, as they normally do, would try to sort of reject all the opponents. So they never mentioned that this principle was really borrowed from Proudhon. And Proudhon developed it as a critique of another principle developed by Louis Blanc, who argued from each according to his abilities and to each according to his needs. And Proudhon said that that was unrealistic. You just can't achieve that. And principle which cannot be accomplished is a meaningless principle. So he replaced it by saying not according to needs, but according to work. And Marx also accepted this reasoning. Well, that much as an introduction to why I chose this topic. Although the principle of this distribution according to work or work performed has been accepted by all social democratic parties, by socialists generally, it's a strange thing that it has never been worked out. So you don't have any book or even any article that would give you clear criteria of how you organize your economy in order to implement this principle, which is another unfortunate event that usually goes with epigons, namely that they can't go beyond the words of the master. In that little brochure, Marx just made a statement, gave a few explanations, that was about it. And many generations of socialists in the century that passed since then have just been repeating it without adding anything in substance. So there was an additional reason why one should take up this problem and try to work it out in such a way as to make it possible to implement it, to make it clear and unambiguous. Let me try to do it now, and let me also try to be non-technical, because I understand that most of the audience here are not professional economists. So if you wish to distribute income according to work, you first have to have some notion of conditions under which work is performed. And once you begin to think about it, you realize immediately that work is always individual and collective at the same time. By always, I mean in a general case. You usually work in a group. So it's not only your personal work, effort, or contribution, it is also the contribution of the group in which you work that is responsible for the result of the work. And so you may distinguish an individual component and a collective component in work, or you may wish to say that factors influencing the outcome are direct work, and collective component may be called entrepreneurship. I'll explain in a minute what I understand under collective entrepreneurship. Now, individual or direct work has been described in the management science literature so much that I don't need to add anything to that. I may just note that it has the following two components, namely the component of intensity and duration, and the component of skill. And then skill, again, has two different components. One is your own effort to learn the skill, and the other is the inherited talent you have for a special skill. Some people have higher IQ, the others have lower IQ, and that doesn't depend on their effort. It's just inherited. Now, distribution according to work in strict sense would mean a rewarding according to your effort, which means duration, intensity, and effort of learning the skill, and not according to inherited talent. and you would like to organize your system of distribution and generally your economic system in such a way as to make some difference regarding this fact. Now, what about the collective component or collective entrepreneurship? In a capitalist firm, it is the boss or his representative who is the entrepreneur. He makes the main decisions about the firm, and everybody else is just an employee. In what I call etatist firm, the Soviet type of firm, it's the state or the representative of the state that makes the crucial decisions about the firm. And again, workers just carry them out. Now, in a socialist firm, you don't need the state, and neither you have any need of private owners or managers as their representatives. It's the workers and employees, in other words, those who participate in the work process in the firm, that also make all the crucial decisions about running the firm. And since they make this decision, it's not just joint consultation or co-determination, it's just, in fact, direct management. They appear as collective entrepreneurs. And as collective entrepreneurs, what they have to do is fundamentally three different things. They have to establish work relations among themselves. This means that work atmosphere may be favorable or unfavorable to productive efforts. The human group in the firm may be well integrated or disintegrated. Emotional and physical energy of the collective might be expanded in productive efforts or maybe wasted in mutual accusations and quarrels, and so on. So this is the first component of the collective entrepreneurship. The second is of a more technical nature. Namely, entrepreneurship implies coordination of all activities. And coordination can be carried out at different levels. Coordination itself entails technical coordination, control, and supervision. In the management literature, these are really the elements of entrepreneurial decision-making, namely coordination, control, and supervision. Because you assume a hierarchical subordination, and all the boss has to do is to tell everybody what his work task is, and that's the end of it. Now, in a self-governing setting, it's more than that. You also have to take care of the mutual relations at the place of work. The third element consists in decision-making under uncertainties, which means taking risks for whatever decision you make, and in particular in innovating in your process of work. So in case of success, everybody will share in the success of the firm, but in case of failure, everybody will share in the loss of the firm. And this sharing in successes and losses really means taking risks. And since, of course, you wish to be as successful as possible, and the road to success is a constant innovation, that's why innovation is an essential part of collective entrepreneurship. Thus, we get a definition of entrepreneurship in a socialist firm as being determined by human relations, by work organization, and the creativity of the working collective. We may thus summarize our first findings. Wages plus distributed profits will represent personal income, which will be distributed among everybody participating in the process of work. The personal income plus undistributed profits will represent labor income. And the practical procedure to determine labor income is to find total income and deduct non-labor income. So let's see what non-labor income is. The main definition is obvious. Non-labor income is income that comes from sources different from labor. But what's difficult is to make a clear distinction. What is the result of labor and what is the result of other factors? And many people, the most professional economists, have despaired on that and have thought that it's a general opinion that the dividing line between labor and non-labor income is so arbitrary that you can't say really anything very firm about that. But that's not so. You can say a lot about it, and you can reduce the area of arbitrariness to a minimum, so that for all practical purposes, you can really distinguish labor from non-labor income. Now, non-labor income will consist of various kinds of rents. You first have land rent, and we have established practices and a lot of experience how you measure land rent due to differential fertility and position of land. Then you have urban rent, and again you have practices of extracting urban land from income. You have mining rent, and various systems of royalties have been designed exactly with the purpose of extracting mining rent. Then you have a rate of interest, which neoclassical economists would tell you is reward for waiting or time preference and things like that, but is really a tax you have to pay to rich people who have capital that would otherwise be idle. So they give you capital and you have to pay a price for it. Now, in socialism, you don't have rich people, neither owners of capital, so you don't pay price to any individual in particular. You have to pay the price for the privilege of using social capital, capital which belongs to the society at large. And this price is then used to ration the available investment resources. But clearly, since capital is socially owned, anything that might be due to the use of capital cannot be distributed in personal income. That's non-labor income. Then you have something which I call technological rent, and which doesn't exist in textbooks now in use in your colleges. And it is the result of unequal development of various industries. Some industries expand at a much faster rate than other industries. Some industries are at the beginning of their technological development, and there is a lot of innovation that can be exploited, still not available, but will be available very soon. And others are old industries with more or less a completed technological development. Clearly, the fast-growing industries and those with many new technological inventions will have a fast increasing productivity of labor. And the slow-growing industries, the old industry, will have a low increase in the productivity of labor. And since income depends directly on the productivity of labor, if you didn't do anything about it, in privileged industries, incomes of workers would be high, in the less privileged industries, low. And that has nothing to do with personal effort or collective effort. And that's why you have to extract this technological rent as well in order to leave your income only as labor income. Now, once you've done these things, and all of these rents and the interest rate can be measured quite precisely. It's for a professional economist, it's not at all difficult to design efficient schemes for extracting these components of non-labor income. you may still be left with one bit of income which cannot be attributed to any of the particular sources I quoted, neither to labor. And I call it monopoly rent. Due to all sorts of circumstances, a firm or industry might, even temporarily, enjoy monopoly position in some respect and then earn monopoly income because of that. What you do in this case is to devise a taxation, progressive income taxation, and in this way you eliminate at least part of this monopoly income. But what's more important is that under workers' management arrangement, the monopoly situations are likely to be extremely rare and likely to be overcome and eliminated very quickly, for reasons which I may quote in the discussion if you are interested, but I would like to hurry through the paper in the time I'm allotted in order to leave more time for the discussion. So what you then do is to eliminate all these rents, and then you are left with income which can properly be denoted as labor income. You may now approach the problem from the other end and ask yourself, how do you determine labor income directly? And this is where many people have despaired so far, because they didn't realize that there is a very simple statistical regularity that you may use in this particular context to help you out of the problem. Namely, you may safely assume that from firm to firm, people may differ. You know, in two firms, you may have workers who are more productive, more industrious, more cooperative, more innovating. And in the next firm, all these properties are shared in a lesser degree. So one firm will be doing well and the other will be doing poorly. And if this happens, you don't worry too much, because your principle tells you everybody should arrange his things according to his taste. So if they don't work well, they will have a smaller income. If that's okay with them, that should be okay with the society. No one should really interfere. The basic idea really behind the principle of distribution according to work is a very simple quid pro quo ethical maxim, which says that you can expect from the society as much as you contribute to the society. It's as simple as that. So those who contribute less should expect less, and if they wish to get more, they should contribute more, and it's up to them to make up their minds what they are going to do. So if the two firms differ, you can safely assume it's because people differ, have different preferences, and work differently. But you can't make the same assumption concerning two industries, each having, say, 100 firms, because it's practically impossible. Then that in an entire, say, textile industry, you have just bad workers, and in computer industry, you have only good workers. And that's why in textile industries, wages are low, and in computer industry, wages are high, which is the case in this country and other countries. You just can't assume that because of statistical regularities. So whenever you have this situation, then in an entire industry, wages are lower than in another industry, you are sure it's not the result of the work effort. It's not the result of your principle. It's the consequence of some rents being left in the distribution of personal income, and then at the national level you have to devise appropriate means, usually some sort of taxation, to extract this non-labor income and equalize it industry-wise. Once you've done that industry-wise, what happens at the level of the firm is generally a matter of the decision-making of the firm, and you don't interfere with that. However, you would like to know under or what principles should guide the distribution of income at the level of the firm. What we've done so far is this. In our social plan and through current economic policy, we have equalized business conditions throughout the economy, each industry earning same per capita personal income. But within industry, each firm may be earning widely different incomes. So you would like to know, once the income for the firm has been determined, how you distribute it among the workers. Who is to determine the income differentials, the wage differentials. And the conventional reasoning has been that unions should do that, or in the East, the state should do that. You know, some wise dictator outside the work process should design the proper income differentials. Those who are in favor of equality would say the state should equalize incomes as much as possible. Those who are against equality, they would say that should be as unequal as necessary to stimulate people to work. But the usual attitude of reasoning is that somebody else has to do it. Now, this again would destroy the principle of distribution according to work, because it's not somebody else that decides on that. Then he uses his own scale of preference. It's you who has to participate in this decision making. And this means that only the working collective itself, the people working in the firm, have to decide what the appropriate income differentials are going to be. And the experience shows that the actual process, actual procedure works like this. You set up a committee of workers and ask them to come with an appropriate suggestion, proposal. And they work it out on all sorts of criteria, what in other firms seems to be the case, the differences in terms of, you know, how difficult the job is, how responsibility is, dirty, unpleasant, and things like that. And they allot certain number of points to each factor and come with some sort of income differentials. And then each shop, each group of workers would discuss these income differentials and try to find out whether they are acceptable or not. And then you can observe a very interesting phenomenon to happen. It's as regular as physical laws. Whenever you discuss the appropriate income for your colleagues who are in a different job category, you think that they really don't deserve higher income, and they think that they really do deserve higher income. And then you have to persuade each other, you know, what the proper differential is. But then in the next round, they are in the position to argue what your income should be, and then you find yourself arguing that your income should really be higher, and they think that your income really should be lower. And this teaches you to, you know, this alternating position. Once you are the judge, and next time you have to listen to the judgment of somebody else. This makes you realize that there are different points of view, and that whenever you make a decision, you have to be aware of that. And not only that, you have even to take into account the other fellow's point of view. So it's an extremely important educational process. But apart from that, it's also converging. I'm not aware of any single instance that people would disagree so strongly that they would not be able to reach the decision. And there are two good reasons for this converging process, converging to the point where more or less everybody accepts the structure of income differentials as being proper and just. There are two reasons for that. One is a completely rational one. Suppose your group is in majority, and by the usual democratic principle, we can outvote the other group and impose our valuation to the other group. Now, if we do that, then the other group will be so dissatisfied that they will just withdraw their work. Formally, they will be working, but much below their capacity. They will be hurting themselves, but they will be hurting us as well. So it's in everybody's interest to have sort of good feelings all around, because that will stimulate everybody to put the maximum effort in his work, and everybody will benefit from that. And very soon that becomes clear to every member of the collective. I witnessed cases where this sort of thing happened. The majority voted for, say, too narrow income spans that were not acceptable for certain categories of workers, and they just refused to perform certain jobs, more difficult or more responsible jobs. They said, why should I worry if you don't regard this to be an important job? So they would not apply for responsible positions, something which you may even find difficult to understand. Even the positions of general managers were left vacant because people thought it's too much worry and too little social recognition of the work. So this sort of experimentation very soon leads everybody to the proper position, namely, whether consciously or unconsciously, namely that you have to strike such an income distribution which by not just majority, but by practically everybody is accepted as a just and appropriate. The second reason for the convergence of the process is a psychological one. Namely, our values are very much determined by the values of the group with which we cooperate. So if everybody around you says that your income should be $10,000 and you initially think it should be really $15,000, after a while, after a week, you'll begin to understand the group's point of view, and you'll become rather inclined to accept their judgment. And this, you may call it social pressure, but it's not really social pressure. It's more fundamental than that. Namely, it's a reflection of the fact that we are basically not individualists. We are basically members of the group, and we always seek the approval of the social group in which we live. And we feel very unhappy if there is disapproval of our behavior. For instance, you may be a talented manager, and the firm just needs a good manager, and you may extract the decision about your salary that is really not acceptable to them, but they think, well, we can't afford to lose him, so we have to give him higher wages. That will not make you happy, because you'll feel all the time that your peers, your colleagues, the people you have to work with every day really don't approve of this decision. And very soon, in a month's time or so, you'll go to workers' council and say, why don't you lower my salary? You know, it will relieve me of some worries, and I'll feel much more happy with few dollars less and with social esteem and everything else that goes together with it. So the two processes, socially conditioned processes, are so strong that they invariably produce a convergent general income determination process, and you end up with an income scheme which is acceptable for everybody. Not everybody is completely happy about it. You still have this general phenomenon that everybody considers his particular income to be slightly too low and the other fellow's income slightly too high. But the differences are so slight that you don't worry too much, and you accept it as more or less acceptable, and you work with your full capacity. Well, there are a number of things one can say about that, but I think that what I've just said is essential. What you would next like consider is the problem of allocational efficiency and the optimum distribution of income. And here I may use just a few minutes for those of you who've been trained in neoclassical tradition to draw your attention to some of the contradictions that have never been noticed or rarely been noticed in textbooks and in the classes. The distribution of income that I have described will clearly lead to different wages in different enterprises. And neoclassical economists would say that implies waste. Labor is not efficiently allocated because wages should really be equalized throughout the economy and should be equal to the marginal product of the worker. Because if there is any discrepancy, then it pays to move a worker from the place of lower marginal productivity to the place of higher marginal productivity, because total product will then go up. What can one answer to this sort of argument? Now, one possible answer is again a neoclassical one. And you may argue or counter-argue in the following way. You may say wages are basically equal, wages being reward for direct labor. What is unequal is the reward for entrepreneurship. And no one has ever asked that entrepreneurship should be equalized throughout the economy, so everything is according to the rules of the textbook. And I'm not inventing this dialogue. I had it really a couple of years ago with Milton Friedman. It happened in Belgrade. And he asked the question, well, wouldn't you say that wages are different in different firms? I said, yes. But then he said, that's a clear waste of resources. We in capitalists don't have this. We have equal wages throughout the economy. So my answer was this neoclassical one, because that would be more convincing to a man like Friedman than a more sensible answer, to which I'll come in a moment. Let me give you a few hints what has been wrong with neoclassical theory so far. First of all, they argue that each factor of production should be priced according to its marginal product. I apologize to those of you who are not initiated into the wisdom of neoclassical economics, but some of your colleagues have asked me to spend a few minutes on that, so let me do that. And then they say worker is paid the wage, and the wage is equal to marginal product of work. Capital is paid the interest rate, and interest rate is equal to the marginal product of capital. And land is paid rent, and rent is equal to the marginal product of land. And then you have a beautiful theory of income distribution, which you have to describe in your exam papers. But people forget that they really talk in terms of 4 factors of production, not only 3. The 4th being entrepreneurship. So whenever it suits them, whenever you have to justify profits, then you say, well, profits have to be paid to the entrepreneur because he is the organizer of the entire process and so on. But when you have to design your income distribution theory, you forget about entrepreneur, and for a very simple reason, because you can't measure entrepreneurship. You know, what's the marginal product of entrepreneurship? And if you can't measure entrepreneurship, you can't reward it marginal product, and then the theory breaks down. So it's so simple a trick that you would not really believe that it's being done on a massive scale in the university and textbooks. That whenever you need 3 factors, you have 3 factors, but you can't, when you cannot accommodate 3 factors, then you have 4 factors. So, you know, depending on what you wish to prove or what sort of social bias has to be justified. That's one point. The second point is that marginal product of capital doesn't exist. And this is what the so-called Cambridge controversy has brought home to many people. Still not to all of them. So most of the professionals is still not aware of the problem. But those who are agree by now that the marginal product of capital doesn't exist unless you introduce interest rate to start with. But if you assume something, there is nothing you have to prove, you know. The assumption is not the proof. So you are left with two factors, really, out of four. Now, if two factors are not remunerated according to their marginal products, whatever you do with the remaining two factors won't help you with your efficient allocation of resources. So the whole scheme is destroyed. But it's even more than that. Even if you could allocate your income according to the marginal productivity theory, you would have to assume a very special production function, so-called linear homogeneous production function. Because this is the only production function that makes for the equality of the sum of marginal products times the quantity of the factor and the total income. If economy is somehow organized in such a way or functions in such a way that the production function is not linearly homogeneous but something else, then you either won't have enough income to reward every factor or you have too much income. So you'll have either surpluses or deficits. And you again are in trouble. What do you do with these surpluses and deficits? And again, it's glossed over. You are never told in your classes that this is the underlying assumption of the marginal productivity of income distribution. And there is no reason whatsoever to assume that the production function of a real-world economy is linearly homogeneous. And finally, even if it were, and even if you were able to measure all the four factors, you are still confronting the fact that distribution of income has something to do with values, not with physical quantities. It's value of the marginal product, which has to be equated with wage or wage rate, which is again a value. And values depend on income distribution. And no one now, since the days of J.B. Clark, would argue that we have the optimum income distribution. As a matter of fact, everybody, I think, agrees today that the income distribution is far from being optimal. Now, if the income distribution is not optimal, then the values you work with don't tell you anything. Whether you go to the margin or you don't go to the margin, they simply don't represent any criterion or any guidance whatsoever for the rational allocation of resources. So, however, from whichever point of view you approach the current, the ruling theory, it proves to be contradictory and it breaks down without repair. It's the same with practice. It's not only the theory that's rotten, it's also the practice that doesn't conform to the theory. And at the time I talked to Milton Friedman, I didn't have this data because at that time radical economics in this country was still not very developed and not many empirical studies have been carried out. Now in the meantime we have several studies. The last one I'm acquainted with is by Barry Blueston from Boston, which show that it's not at all the case that wages are equalized throughout the economy. And the differences are not slight, they are enormous. In this country, the extreme that Blueston has found is for the same skill in different trades and different regions and different races, you may get as different wage as 110%. Now, if your marginal productivity is the same, which you would assume for the same skill at the low-skilled trade with routine work and so on, the marginal product is probably more or less the same. And the remuneration differs by as much as 110%. Then, of course, nothing is left of rational allocation of resources. And so any and we should be quite happy with having different wages in different firms. But there is more than that. And this is the last technical point I'm going to raise. Namely, another assumption that neoclassical economists are making without trying to justify it is that you have smooth, continuous production functions or marginal productivity schedules in the economy. While experience seems to tell us, and empirical measurements seem to tell us, that that's not the case. What seems to be the case is that until you reach the capacity level, you have more or less what accountants and business people would call variable costs constant, and variable costs correspond more or less to marginal cost in economics. And when you reach the capacity level and you wish to go beyond it, then you encounter a barrier which increases sharply your average costs. And this sharp increase, it's really a kink, looks as if your marginal cost schedule has suddenly become vertical. So you may have two firms coexisting, each of them using full capacity, but having very different average costs, and therefore the productivity of labor being very different each of the firm. And still, this may be the most rational possible allocation of resources, because by moving one worker from a low productivity firm to a high productivity firm, you don't increase total output of the society, you really decrease it. Because in the high productivity case, this worker is now working beyond the capacity and his marginal output is rather small. While in the low productivity case, he was working at the optimum of that firm and his marginal output was equal to average wage. So you lose average wage of the low productivity firm and you gain a rather small amount in the high productivity firm, and that is not a good thing to do. In short, the only objection that the traditional economist could find against the scheme that I'm trying to outline today, namely that the wages will differ from firm to firm, turns out to be not a valid objection at all. You may dispense with it and you may proceed with your analysis. And that's what I'm going to do next. Namely, the second problem, one problem is the efficiency of allocation. The second problem you will be interested in is the optimum distribution of income. And here again, the traditional economics finds a problem which it cannot solve. It cannot solve it not because people are not sophisticated enough, not because people at MIT and Harvard don't know sufficient mathematics, but because it's inherently insolvable in that social and analytical framework. Namely, if somebody outside an exogenous force has to decide what the proper income differentials are, then this exogenous arbitrator has to engage in interpersonal utility comparisons. And there is no objective basis for interpersonal utility comparisons. And whenever the established economic theory cannot solve a problem, they say the problem cannot be solved. They don't say our theory is wrong or our society is wrong. They say the problem is wrong. It cannot be solved. And under these conditions, it really cannot be solved, because if you can't say, you know, if you can't judge the other fellow's welfare, if you can judge only your own welfare, then clearly you can't make any decision objectively that involves the other fellow's welfare. And so income distribution is arbitrary, and so there is nothing you can do about it. And then those who are more reactionary say, well, then why should you worry about it? And the whole thing is then left to the market forces, and poor remain poor and rich remain rich. Now, that's not the case in socialism, because you don't have this exogenous arbitrator deciding on your income. It's the group in which you live and with which you work, in which you participate, that decides what the appropriate distribution of income is, and the group involves all the time in interpersonal comparisons of all sorts. And although on the logical basis you can't go inside the other fellow's mind, in the social process you still can persuade the other fellow, or he can persuade you. And if, as a sociologist or psychologist, you observe that this is the fact, that people accept the other people's suggestions and evaluations, then this is all you have to do. There is nothing you can do better than that. And after such a process of bargaining and persuasion and arguing and perhaps calling outside experts to evaluate the difficulty or responsibility of a job and so on, you eventually reach an agreement what the proper structure of income differentials are, and people accept this agreement as a just one, and this is the optimum distribution of income. Because optimum means the best possible. And there is nothing better than being just. You just can't conceive anything better than having just distribution. So by bringing the social factors in, social relations in, you solve your problem in a very natural and very simple way, instead of worrying about impossibility of solution in the way the traditional economics does. Now, before I end, let me draw your attention to an additional factor, which is not mentioned in the critique of the Gotha program and usually not mentioned in treatises on distribution according to work, but which is, although it's often implied, but which should be mentioned formally and formalized in a systematic treatment. Namely, the mere principle of distribution according to work is insufficient for a socialist society. I can't go into the whole social theory of socialism here. It would take us too long. So let me try to cut a shortcut and say why this is so. It's primarily because of the factors that do not depend on personal efforts, that are beyond your personal control, and also do not depend on those various sources of rent. It's really on the hereditary factor, something which you have just because you are lucky to have it, have talent or IQ, and other fellow doesn't. And not only that he doesn't have it, he may even be seriously handicapped. He may be so handicapped that he, with the best of his will and all the efforts he makes, he just can't earn enough for living. So what you do then? Then your principle really tells you, since this just distribution you get from the society as much as you contribute to the society, depends on an implied assumption, namely that it is within your possibilities to contribute this to the society. If you are not able to contribute to society, then you can't be punished for that. So the obvious consequence of this sort of reasoning is then that the distribution of work has, according to work, has to be complemented by the distribution according to needs. Again, we need criteria when you intervene with this or complement the first principle with the second principle. And the criterion is, again, a very simple one. Whenever the question is of the goods that satisfy one particular need, and the difference is just a quantitative one. For instance, if you have a Volkswagen or a Cadillac, you will be taken to the place where you wish to go. A little bit more comfortable, a little bit less comfortably. That's the only difference. But your need for transportation will be satisfied. So if some people cannot afford to have Cadillacs, you don't worry about that. That will not affect their lives or their happiness in any disturbing way. However, if you have primary education and the other fellow has university education, your life chances are affected. You simply cannot satisfy your needs in the same way. You are a different person with education and without education. And this gives you the clue how you solve the problem. Namely, all those activities that build the personality or contribute to personality building, the building of capacity, capability, skills, and so on, in some way, should be withdrawn from the market process and should be organized on non-market principles, and to them, the principle according to need should be applied. In other words, you will educate every person according to his capability of absorbing education and not according to his possibility of paying or his parents' ability to pay. And similarly, with medical care or with culture or with, say, ecological care, and anything that is of fundamental importance for your life as an individual. You will organize this on a non-market basis and apply this principle and design schemes which will make it possible for everybody to enjoy the products of social labor equally. And let me end by just saying that all societies have catered in some way for their less privileged people. All societies have known charity, for instance, for those who are unable to provide means of living. But no other society except socialism has made it a direct result or direct consequence of its basic philosophy. When you provide means of living to a handicapped person, it's not a charity. When you send old age people to the place where can they live on a decent pension and so on, that's not a charity. That's the direct consequence of the main organizing principle of your society, namely the principle that whenever you can control your activities, you are free to do whatever you wish to do. And the principle applies: as much as you give to the society, you can expect to get back. Whenever it's beyond your power to control your activity, so whatever you do, you just can't go beyond certain barriers. It's up to the society to take care of you and to equalize the basic conditions of living so that every individual is eventually treated equally as an individual and has a stake in the society. This is, I would submit to you, the socialist approach to the distribution of income. The approach which a wealthy society of contemporary world, West European or American, can afford to have. It can afford it, but it has to will it. And this is a different story. Thank you.
Okay, I guess the floor will be open now for questions. I guess, would you like to recognize him, Dr. Horvath, or would you
Yeah.
like me to
Why
recognize
don't I
him?
do it?
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Jane?
I have a whole note card full of questions, so I'll ask one and then I'll let some other people, and then maybe I can get some more later. But I really don't know where to start. Let me see. I guess in kind of a general way, my question relates to, you took one sentence out of Critique of the Gothic Problem and elaborated on it. But as I recall, it's been a while since I've read it, it also implies a transition to a higher state beyond socialism. And how you get there affects not only industrial means of working, but also people's ideas. So I was wondering, like, how do you change people's ideas on work? Because according to the system you set up, it seems to be all monetary and centered. And where does the idea of helping, you know, like in the real world, if you're living in a socialist state and other people aren't, like, of helping, of providing, of changing the old capitalist ideas of what work is and why you work?
These are really two different questions. One is the international aspect of socialism. You have socialism in one country, what do you do with the rest of the world? The other is how do you go from capitalism to socialism in your own country? Now, I don't want to elaborate on the international aspect because you have to have a number of socialist countries before you wish to do it. And I don't think we have a number of socialist countries now that are pressed for doing it on the international scale. So let me stick then to the national problem. Now, here there is a widely shared misconception about the incentives. And people say monetary incentives are bad, so you have to have moral incentives. And they don't think very much when they say that. What is bad is incentives, either monetary or moral. What you would like people to do is to work because they feel that's good, that's proper, you know, that's how every man or woman should behave. Not because you have to be induced to work, otherwise you are lazy, you don't care about anything. There is no difference as far as incentives go. There is no difference between monetary and moral incentives. And if you look what happens in the countries where leaders stress moral incentives, you'll find out that what they do is to replace money by other awards, like medals and diplomas and titles and prestige and your pictures in the newspapers and posters and so on. And that's as bad or as good as giving people money. That there is really no difference. And you may then assume that some people value prestige and social power more than money, and if they wish to have money, it's really in order to exert some social influence. So for those people, so-called moral incentives might be even preferable because they get this social prestige immediately. They don't have to buy it. So that's not really a clear dividing line. There is, however, an additional difficulty with moral incentives, namely, all countries have tried it. All countries, let me be more exact, with genuine social revolutions have tried it. Russians have tried it, Cubans, Yugoslavs, Chinese. Only some revolutions occurred earlier and some revolutions later, and everybody eventually had the same experience, and the experience is the following one. First, you may have very inadequate distribution of either awards